Hi, you guys. Welcome back. My name is Carrie Penny. I am the Happy Crafty Homemaker, and today we are going to be jumping in on our exploration of individual fibers and fiber group studies. So, I am still getting over a cold. I feel a cough coming on. Right now, I'm just coughing when I'm triggered by dust or cat fur or something like that. It is not that bad. It is not that serious. So if I do have like a weird jump cut or editing in here, it's probably because I started coughing and did not want to subject you to 5 minutes of me sneezing or coughing. This is my fresh shorn sheep mug from Kickwheel Studio. Clear my throat. So we are jumping in. The first episode of this was discussing the difference between superwash and non-superwash wool. Today, we're going to be jumping into some more characteristics of wool, as well as looking specifically at the attributes of Merino and BFL, also Blueface Leicester. So, tally-ho and on with it. So first off, wool is a really cool fiber. I really enjoy working with wool. Wool comes in many different forms. And a lot of that is based on the two vocabulary words we do need to know, which are staple or staple length and the micron count. So these two things really do determine what the texture, when you just pick up your yarn and feel it, what that is going to feel like. So the staple length is the length of the fiber. So when it comes off the sheep, what is the length of the hair? The micron count is how small is that hair. So the micron count can range from 11 to 40. Most things for us hand knitters, crocheters, and hand spinners are going to fall within between 15 and 22. That does not mean that there aren't some more coarser fibers or some finer fibers. The lower the number, the finer the fiber. But the bulk of the things that we see, being hand dyed or being offered in roving to spin, or things that we are going to encounter regularly, are generally going to fall between that 15 to 22 kind of zone. There are other characteristics which we probably will not get into because it does not necessarily impact how the fiber knits or crochets specifically, but it will affect spinners, so just be aware. And that is the texture of the hair. Is it a coily texture? Does it have a crimpy wave? Different things like that do also affect things about like the spinning of it, but we're really focusing more on what do knitters and crocheters need to know or ought to know about these fibers. So, wool is an awesome fiber. It is, I don't want to say hypoallergenic because it's not really hypoallergenic, but it is retardant to bacterial growth. It is also a flame retardant fabric, so it is not non-flammable, but it is a little bit harder to set wool on fiber unless it is a 100% fresh off the sheep, full of lanolin wool. Lanolin being one of the natural oils that a sheep produces, gives that oily texture to fresh fleece. It's also what a lot of people smell when they smell fresh wool and it smells like an animal. That is also frequently what we are smelling is residual lanolin on the fiber. It is naturally very absorbent. I personally find wool to take on more water than things like bamboo or cotton do. It just seems to, it all up in there. It's thirsty. But this is also one of the reasons why wool garments are also great to wear, and why I say don't be afraid to wear wool in the summertime necessarily. Living in the southeast of the US, I do recommend using a finer gauge yarn for any knit or crochet projects you might be wearing in the summer, just to keep the fabric itself loose and light on your skin. But most wools will pull moisture away from the skin and it filters the moisture out to the outer side of the garment, and it will evaporate off the outer side of the garment, which is one of the reasons why you frequently see things like merino base layers, which we'll get into here in a minute. It is anti-static, and also it is stain resistant. So once again, it can get stained, but it's not going to immediately be ruined if you get a dribble on there. I have had to wash coffee out of many a wool sweater, and actually where I've spilt coffee while knitting socks. So first off, we're going to be talking about merino. So this is the example of merino I pulled out of my stash. Now this one is a superwash merino, so we are missing the natural haze to the merino that we talked about in the superwash versus non-superwash video. However, I did not pull the DK merino that I had before, so we're going to look at this beautiful beach bum yarn. But you can see there is still a little bit of a halo and a haze there. So merino comes from the merino sheep, which were originally bred in Spain. During the Middle Ages, it was actually against the law, and to a very high extent in Spain, to export merino sheep outside of Spain. However, it has since moved around the globe. We do have merino sheep here in the US. They are also very heavily raised within New Zealand and Australia. So you have a lot of different merino breeds. That is not one specific breed of merino sheep, especially as it has moved across the globe. The average micron count for merino is 11 to 24. And in general, it is half the width of a human hair. So it's a very, very, very fine fiber. The individual hair fiber is a very fine fiber. So one of the advantages, it has a staple length of 2 to 4 inches. So it is a fairly small staple length. Makes it very easy to draft. So when you're spinning it, it does draft very smoothly generally. And it has a soft crimp wave to it. So it's not necessarily going to tangle on itself once it has been carded. So one of the things that's really cool with why merino is so popular. Now merino has kind of taken over most of what we see dyers using, and has kind of taken over as far as knitters and crocheters, what we have easy access to. And one of the reasons for that is because it is a finer fabric. Or makes a finer fabric. It is a finer fiber. So when it comes into contact with the skin, it does tend to be super smooth against the skin. The individual hairs for the merino actually yield to touch. So they don't give you those burrs and pokes that we see in some coarser wools or some other breeds of wool. It tends to be very soft and very yielding. It has beautiful drape. It has a nice natural sheen to it. I did get a little warm in between filming videos today, so I did take my scarf off, but you can see even crocheted, we have a nice wiggly garment here in merino wool. Because of the staple length though, one of the characteristics of merino is it is not as durable to rubbing. So it does have a very high tensile strength. If you pull on the yarn in the length of the yarn, it has a very, very high tensile strength. And the hair fiber itself has a very high tensile strength. However, when you spin this and turn this into yarn, things like rubbing the yarn, so like say heels of socks, balls of the feet on socks, underarms of sweaters, you might see more pilling in merino than you would some other types of breed-specific wool fibers. Now, having said that, that does not mean that I'm saying don't use merino for anything. I love merino. I love merino socks. I love merino sweaters. I love merino shawls. Just it's a characteristic to be aware of. So if you are looking to make, say, athletic socks, I might not go with the merino. If you're looking to wear socks that you're going to wear to the office, you're just keeping your tootsies warm while you're having a really nice night by the fire, great. If you're doing housework, running errands, normal day-to-day activity, then yeah, merino socks are going to be perfectly fine for that. Now, if you do have, and I'm going to say this as I did with the sock making video, if you have thicker ankles or your transition from your ankle to your calf is not dramatic and you find your socks bagging, you might want to reduce the needle size to give you a little bit more spring to your sock. And you also probably want to look at something that has a slightly higher nylon count if you want to stay with merino wool. That's just because merino does stretch. It is a very stretchy fiber that's part of the resilience of the fiber and nature of merino wool. When it comes to care of merino, I always recommend with any of your hand knits or hand crocheted items to either wash on delicate or hand wash and lie flat to dry. It always is going to extend the life of your garment to take gentle care of your things. And as needed, you will need to depill them and things like that. Things like socks may eventually need darning. Now, I have a ton of merino socks I've knit over the years. I have never had a problem with my socks falling apart irregularly. They seem to thin with normal wear. But I haven't had to darn any yet, and it's been 10 years since I started knitting socks. The only problem I've had is I did have a cat get a hold of a pair and rip a hole in a sock, but I haven't had them just unnaturally wear out for me. That could just be the way I wear socks, but for socks, you are going to see merino paired with nylon to add to the friction durability, not just to the durability of the tensile strength of the yarn. Merino, one of the things it does particularly well is that wicking moisture away from the skin. The fine fibers of the merino are very good at pulling moisture away from the skin and allowing it to evaporate on the outside of your garment, which does help prevent from or protect from things like hypothermia. So if you are out hiking in the wintertime, or even if you're out in the summer when it is raining, if you are wearing merino base layers under your clothing, it's going to keep that moisture away from the skin layer, which is going to reduce things like a reduction in core body temperature. That is one of the reasons why we do see a lot of base layers made out of merino wool. I do also really like merino base layers if it's particularly cold, because you can have a very fine garment, a very thin garment close to the skin to retain body heat and prevent moisture buildup close to the skin, while also layering on top of it and not creating added bulk and lack of mobility when you are doing things. So we will also probably circle back to base layers when we start talking about silk later on down the road, which is another great option for base layers and retaining heat to the skin. However, merino is a very, very good option for things like that. Also, if you were just looking to have a layering piece to toss on under a flannel or something, but you tend to get sweaty in your clothes, consider something like merino, which is going to pull that moisture away from your skin, preventing you from getting wet in your clothing, and allow that to evaporate off from your skin layer. It is very good at retaining a natural body temperature. It does not trap heat inside of your clothes beyond that which your core body temperature is, which is why merino is also a particularly good fiber if you were looking to make summer sweaters as well as winter sweaters. It is a fully breathable fiber, so you do get the transaction of the air around you versus your body temperature. I don't know why it does that. I don't know why it's so good at that. That was not something I could really find an answer for, but I do know from experience living in the Southeast, I find my merino t-shirts to be more comfortable than a lot of my cotton t-shirts tend to be. Just because it does tend to breathe more and you don't retain that moisture. So your skin layer doesn't tend to feel as hot and sticky and uncomfortable. But if you live in an arid climate, it also will help regulate the air between you and your clothing as well. So I do recommend using a fingering weight or maybe sport DK weight for summer garments. As you get colder in the season, obviously a thicker fiber would be better. If you're going to be cold, I swear, I am very sorry, you guys. Excellent base layers, excellent socks. It's wool, but better. It has all the characteristics of just what you see labeled as just wool, except it's better. That's really what it comes down to. If you have a specific question about merino, let me know and I will definitely come back. One of the things a lot of people like it for is it has a nice sheen, it has a nice drape. It does take to blocking very well. But because it is a stretchable fiber, if you are making a piece that is going to be very heavy and you're going to have certain points of the finished garment that are going to be bearing the stress of the weight of the garment, you do want to reinforce those areas. So shoulder seams, underarm seams, side seams. If you were making, say, a 5-pound dress out of merino wool, you do want to reinforce those seams so that the weight of the garment does not warp and misshape your final piece over time. These are minor things just to be aware of. I don't want to turn you off of merino because I do love it as a fiber and I do love what it offers. But to continue having longevity in your finished projects, these are things to be aware of and to take note of. Also in the structure of garments, a lot of times things that are made for merino in particular, you will see, you know, some sort of seaming or edging goes on where you're creating structure points. But as you get into thicker fibers, you are creating more weight, but a lot of times those don't seem to noticeably stretch as much except for in the length. Just experience. Just things that I've noticed over the years and working with merino. But it is an absolutely beautiful fiber. You do, for socks in particular, see it paired with nylon to add to that friction durability. I have no problem with the small amount of nylon that's in there. I do think it adds to the sheen of the natural merino, but I don't think it takes anything necessarily away from it, but it does add that durability for friction wear for underarms, heels, toes, things like that. But once again, I mean, you can see there is a nice smooth sheen on this. This one is a superwash, so we are missing the natural scales on this yarn in particular. It takes dye absolutely beautifully. That is one of the benefits of working with wools in general. Most of them do accept color very readily. So on to BFL. Now, Blueface Leicester is kind of a newcomer for Americans. It is slowly coming back into vogue, in particularly for sock knitters, though. And we'll get into that. But first off, the lineage of BFL starts in the 1700s in England with Robert Bakewell. I had never thought I would learn so much about sheep rearing history as I have in researching these, but this was kind of cool. So he was specifically trying to cultivate a sheep that had a high quality wool yield and a high yield of high quality wool, as well as an animal that would produce meat. Most farming, especially as we're looking in the 1700s, you are definitely raising animals for multiple purposes. So I know there are some people that have problems with the fact they were bred for meat as well as their wool. It is what it is. For me, it is what it is. By the 1800s, the late 1800s, the modern BFL breed was kind of a final iteration breed in England. By the 1960s, we had societies and everything else that were dedicated to the raising, rearing, and procreating of specifically Blueface Leicester sheep. Yeah, the breed was codified in the late 1800s as its own official breed by then. The micron count is 24 to 28, so it is definitely a coarser-based wool based on the micron count than a merino. The staple length is 3 to 6 inches, so you're dealing with a much larger length of wool with BFL versus the merino as well. I do believe that BFL, the natural texture, is a coil, but I could be wrong about that. So BFL is kind of cool. This is my sample of BFL here. You can see, once again, we do have some haloing, but we do have more distinct haloing in this one. This one is also a superwash. This is one of my newer acquisitions. This is from Knit Circus. But even though it is a superwash, you can see there is very distinct haloing on this wool. And part of that is because of the staple length of this. It's more obvious on this. To touch the two, there is definitely a texture difference. This one does definitely feel coarser than the merino, but not so coarse it is prickly or sticky. So another cool thing about BFL is the fact it does not naturally have scales on the fiber like other wools do. So remember when we were talking about the superwash versus non-superwash wool in the first video, I showed you the picture of the fiber and the scales on that, and we talked about how those scales aid and resist in accepting dye, prevent felting, or create felting. This is naturally felt resistant, even if it's not superwash, because it does not have scaling on it. So I am not sure how BFL is processed to be superwash if it does not have scales on it, because like we said, the process of making a yarn superwash is blasting the scales off. So I am not sure how this is a superwash BFL, unless it is an American BFL. So we do have BFL here in America, but most of them are only 90% blue-faced Leicester sheep. They are 10% typically merino in an American BFL wool. So that could be what's going on there. Just another like random fact I learned in the process of really researching these fibers. I'm getting fiber particulate now in my chest. So BFL is more durable by nature than merino because the micron count is higher and the staple length is longer. It also has a very high tensile strength. It also has a very high friction durability. Because of that, this is one of the yarns we're seeing more and more people wanting for their socks. Because if you do have a problem with the nylon content of other sock yarns, BFL can be spun into a sock yarn that does not need nylon for durability. They won't necessarily be as luxurious feeling or as silky feeling or as soft feeling going on. However, if you were to make boot socks, or something you're going to use, you know, at working out, walking, or hiking, I would recommend going for a BFL sock yarn for that, as it will hold up much longer to that type of wear and activity. All that having been said, though, this is definitely a fiber you could still wear close to your skin if you wanted to make a sweater out of it or a scarf or something like that. Definitely, I would recommend testing and touching the yarn. Like in the case of this one, I can notice the difference between the merino and the BFL touching them directly, but this does not feel coarse or uncomfortable to me. So I could still wear this, you know, around my neck and chest area and not have a problem, because it is a little bit more durable. I don't want to say coarse because that makes it sound like it's an unpleasant yarn to touch, hold, or feel. Because it is a little bit more durable, though, you do have some extra options. It doesn't have quite the same amount of drape as, say, the merino does, but because it is a little bit more durable, if you wanted to do more of like an outerwear sweater or a lined sweater where you're wearing this more as like a swacket sweater jacket. This would definitely be the wool I would probably navigate towards for that. And that's only because it's really going to hold up to that more active use. So not just in necessarily activewear socks or hardwear socks. I would also be looking at BFL for outerwear clothing. Not necessarily, you know, a decorative sweater or cardigan or something, but if you're wanting to make a heavy coat, heavy jacket out of a wool yarn, I would probably start looking, if you want a breed specific, towards a BFL, as it really will hold up much better. It's also going to be felting resistant, as it does not have those scales on there. So things like your underarms are going to be slower. They will still pill, but they will be slower to pill. You're going to be slower to see the wear from the underarm area of where you're moving your arms, and it just rubs there. I think we may actually have already covered everything that is in my notes for this, which I'm really surprised because I tend to way over talk on these things. Yeah. So, welcome to a little bit more information about what to expect from your Merino and your BFL. They are very, very similar. I hate mentioning pro cons of different fibers because it makes it sound like if there's a con, it's, you know, the end of the world. Please don't take these as, I will let you know if I think something is an end of the world. Don't touch this, stay away from this, or you want this only in small bits. I will let you know if I think this is a problematic in your finished item fiber or not. I love both the BFL and the Merino equally. Once again, I give BFL probably a 9 out of 10, not because there's something wrong with the BFL, only because the BFL does not meet my needs for most of the things I want a wool yarn for. So if you are looking for something that is more rugged wearing, you probably will reverse those numbers and you'll look at the Merino and be like, yeah, it's probably an 8 or 9 out of 10 for me. And the BFL is a 10 out of 10. It's not a knock on the breed. It's not a knock on the yarn. It's not a knock on its characteristics. It's just for what I do, which is primarily shawls, socks, accessories. It's probably not the yarn I'm going to reach for the most often. However, I do have this beautiful shawl cake of it, so we'll see what that ends up becoming. But all that having been said, I think these are both fantastic fibers to work with. They have their unique characteristics, and I think once again, as we're moving through this, one of the things I hope that I can impress on anybody who's listening to these videos or watching these videos is, as I always say, I think every yarn has its purpose, from base acrylic to Angora. I think every yarn has its purpose and its time to shine and what it necessarily can do the best and where it's going to exhibit its primary characteristics the best. So unless there's just something where I'm just like, this is trash, don't touch it, it's awful, run as far away, I will let you know if I genuinely think something is an awful fiber in general for our purposes as knitters and crocheters and trying to keep the spinners engaged as well. But for the most part, there will be times where I think each thing does its best. I think Merino makes beautiful sweaters, hats, scarves. For mittens, I'm probably looking more for BFL between these two, but we do have a number of other sheep breeds that we have left to discuss. So I don't know if we will be coming back to this in 1 week or 2 weeks, but hopefully it will not be multiple weeks like it took me to do this video. But if you have any questions, leave them down below. At the end of the section on sheep wool, I will definitely record another video if we have a lot of questions coming in about answering the questions that you guys have. So please definitely leave a comment down below if you have something you want to add or something you want to ask about Merino or BFL as we continue through this series. I love you guys. I hope you are having a wonderful, fantastic day. I look forward to seeing you guys real soon. Bye, you guys.